Welcome to Writer Syndrome, podcast about writing from start to finish. This episode's topic, goals, writing goals, setting goals, having goals, making goals, doing goals.
Goals.
I'm Russ Capasso, and joining me, as always, is Tim Ledney. Tim, what are your goals? What do you have?
My goals.
Is that too soon? Should I just ask how you're doing first, the easy into it?
My goal today was to actually make it to this podcast. So it's like, I got a nap in mind. I'm going to come home. Do I have time to sleep before?
Sleeping.
Spoiler alert. I napped a little bit.
It's so, well, behind the scenes, we record this in the morning. How do you nap before in the morning? Don't you sleep and then wake up and then?
I sleep. I wake up. My first goal is I have to wake up and get my older kid ready for, today was chorus. So that was before school.
Okay.
Brought her to school, come home, get my other kid ready for a regular day, bring her to school, come home, walk the dog. And then my older one forgot her computer. So then drive back to school.
Oh, boy.
Drop off the computer.
Checklist.
And then come back. And then I was like, I got time for 40 minutes to sleep. So I took it.
You could have been writing.
It could have been writing.
Or prepping for this podcast.
I think it's why I did. I read that terrible article you sent along.
It wasn't that bad, but yeah. Well, I mean, all those things you just listed, I think would be, as we were talking about before, more responsibilities than goals. So
I will say that when I had my goal of writing, I wasn't napping, but sometimes I would nap after I wrote. So I'd come home from like that rigmarole of drop off.
Yeah.
And I'd spend an hour or two working. And then if I was completely drained, I would try to take like a midday nap. Yeah, I would.
A midday nap before noon?
Yeah, totally.
When does your day end? When do you go to bed? Like 5 o'clock?
Too late. And that's probably part of the problem,
Yeah. Well,
often past midnight, sometimes up to 1.
Well, we could probably spend the entire episode talking about your daily schedule, but we don't need to do that.
No, you don't care about that anymore. Shouldn't have started it. Anyway, what are your goals, Russ?
To just be the best that I can. I don't know. So I think this is going to be kind of a wild card episode, right? Ish. Beginning of the year, new year, right? And kind of talking about where we want to do with our writing. By the time this episode comes out, as you're listening to this, my book will be pretty close to being out to the public.
Yep.
So spring of 2023. So probably a month away from now, maybe 2 at the most. My book will be out there. So that's a goal, is to actually publish that thing, which was a goal maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
No, you weren't publishing 2 years ago.
No, I don't think so. I don't think I was in a spot. Well, I think in my mind, when I first started this, I was like, all right, I want to have this published within, I wrote the first draft like 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And I was like, I can get this published by the end of the year. And then each step came along and I was like, maybe next year. And I was like, this is a lot harder than I thought. Maybe the following year. So the goalposts kept moving as I go through this. But
I like it. So thinking all the way back to like when you started this process, like your initial goal, even say, I think it's absolutely phenomenal that, you didn't meet your initial timeline, but you weren't discouraged and didn't give up. You actually hit your goal. So good to know that, like, those goalposts move, but you still crossed or crossing. But 2, like when you went thinking all the way back to like your impetus to start this process and like your goal setting to finish your first novel, what got you there and what kept you there?
To getting to that? Well, it helped, during the pandemic, you couldn't leave the house, so that helps. But I think it was just something that I had set time to do. So, and I should say, like my initial goal for this wasn't actually to publish this. It was just to write like a draft, like just write a complete draft and be kind of, okay, cool. I did this thing. I don't need to go. Success to me at that moment was just finishing it and saying, I wrote 75,000, 80,000 words. Cool, I can do this thing. And then
because you'd been flirting with writing before that, right? Like, because you'd sent me some short stories, like
we've done some screenplays too, like we've traded short screenplays and stuff like that. And I've always been flirting with it, but this was like, okay, let me actually sit down and see if I can do this thing. And then I did, and then it was like, okay, that was a lot of fun. What would be the next step for this to actually maybe get it out to the world? But I think the initial impetus to get through it was it's just something I'd always wanted to do. So,
So, so did you prioritize it above other aspects of your life? Thinking about goals,
Yes.
like
Yep.
obviously writing a novel looms huge, like gigantic,
Yep.
probably bigger in retrospect than it was when you're like, hey, I'm going to write a novel.
Yeah.
Did you cut off or limit other, obviously, I guess the pandemic forced you to limit some things,
Yep.
but did you prioritize your goals, I guess is what I need to ask.
Yeah, definitely. Because so that year before the pandemic hit, I actually planned to take that year off and just focus on some personal projects. So like, writing a novel, that'd be something I could do. I have some ideas for like some screenplays, like, I'll write 1 or 2 screenplays this year. Or, I've always wanted to design a video game. Always wanted to design a board game. Like, so I had all these kind of hobbies and kind of side extracurricular.
So you're going to take it off
things.
work. You're like, I'm done. Like you'd saved enough.
Yep.
To like sustain on.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and that had always been my plan for a long time. I wanted to learn how to build an Android app, so I started doing that. I was kind of just like wanted to tinker around with some personal projects and take a step away from the crazy tech corporate world for a bit. And I went through all of them, and I was like, okay, what can I do right away, and what's something I could do by myself without the help of anyone else? Like, what could I take to the end by myself? And it's like, okay, well, video game, I definitely need other people. I needed all the resources and knowledge for that. Screenplays, I could write a screenplay, but getting it produced and doing everything else, that's a lot of, I need other people for that to happen. That's not entirely true. Sure, you can write your own screenplay, you can fund it yourself and get your camera and go film it with some friends. Absolutely, but you still need some support there. And not that a book isn't entirely like a siloed thing, but it was the one thing I feel like, I could write this thing. I'm writing it by myself. I can get it to the end, all 80,000 words. Revisions I can do by myself. Finding beta readers, okay, I can handle that. Finding an editor, okay, I can handle that. So I think that was like, that's how I kind of like, all right, this is the thing I can move to the top because this is something I can push all the way through to the end. And then I could say, I can actually self-publish this thing. So I could literally take it from beginning to end by myself entirely. So with, of course, help and support along the way, but still something I could drive. So, but yeah, that was kind of how I narrowed it down of all the things I wanted to work on. And I got to the end of the first draft and I was like, all right, that was a lot of fun. What I need to do next to make this, readable.
So once you identified writing as like one of your top goals and one that you could drive to the finish, did you have competing priorities in that time period where you had to, or were you able to just focus on setting a schedule, process, and pushing this one thing to the finish?
Yeah, I was able to focus. Yeah, I was definitely able to focus on just a process and setting a schedule, waking up every morning, working on it for a couple hours in the morning, kind of revisiting and then spending the afternoons like just learning about storytelling and writing. We've talked about this before. It's like, I don't have a background in storytelling. It's just like we watch a lot of movies, read a lot of books, and there's a certain extent of just reading for the entertainment factor. And there's another step of like reading and watching things and analyzing them to understand why they're good or why they're bad, and being able to break those parts, break it down into its components. We've talked about the story beats, and then so that's pretty much how I got through it. Just reading everything I could, reading every book about writing, every book about how to tell a story, how to break it down, and then realizing that what I had written was not hitting any of those things, then going back and going back and fixing it. So, and I think it was like kind of like that push of like, I'm learning something I really enjoy, storytelling, film, books, and learning about the craft of it and actually how it's done, I think was kind of fed the process, So spending those days just reading through any book about developing characters, creating plots, and how to structure the 3 acts and blah, blah, blah. It's kind of like, okay, now I can apply this back to what I've written. And it's kind of like the box is open at that point. So
can I lean just a little bit more into it? Because I think it's slightly disingenuous to say that, I think you definitely prioritized writing, but you have other priorities. Right now you're, writing, editing 2 podcasts, you play hockey.
Yep.
Like you must have, was there a time period where those other goals that you had challenged writing for the spotlight or took away your time in a way that was frustrating or difficult? And if so, how'd you get through it?
Yeah, it definitely did. Because some things, like at least the podcast, there's like a set time for it. So it's like we release episodes twice a month. The other podcasts do, it's like we're doing episodes every week, but at least there was a set schedule for it. So I could like there was times where I wasn't organizing my time correctly, and all of a sudden those things would pop up, and I was like, oh, I want to write like, 10 pages today or whatever. Then I was like, oh wait, I've got to edit a podcast. Shoot. And that would take a while to also, it's another thing I'm like learning how to be better with. So yes, initially, I think it was just because it was a lot that I was taking on at once, and also learning all these things at the same time. But once I got through that curve and realizing, okay, there's a rhythm to this, there's a pacing to this. But definitely there's a lot of competing priorities, responsibilities, friends, family, and stuff like this that you want to make sure you not completely shun away. I definitely let too much of that also, social aspect kind of think, take over some of my time.
In that article that you sent, I think that for me, there's always three things at play, right? There's goals, there's responsibilities.
Yeah.
And then the one that I think is worth talking about is that pleasure aspect, what you're doing for recreation, because I'd go crazy if I was always pushing the needle forward in every aspect of my life. I think it's one thing to be driven, and it's important to have that drive and, a clear set of your goals, but you also need to be social.
Yes.
Whether it's seeing friends and family or playing video games. I know we've discussed drinking before, the pros and huge cons to doing that while trying to write.
Definitely got in the way.
Yeah, it totally gets in the way. But it's in the same respect, I do think that pleasure component I work on a reward system for myself almost always.
Yeah.
And when I was really in the rhythm of writing, I wouldn't allow myself to play video games until I'd written that day. Mm-hmm. And even breaking the habit of playing games, just like when I broke the habit of drinking, it made it less of a time sink, because I wasn't like, got to do it. And even at the time, I was like, am I being too withholding from myself? Am I surveilling myself too much?
Yeah.
But I think if you want to have these big goals, like recording a podcast or like writing a book or running a marathon or half marathon, you kind of need to surveil yourself a little bit if you're serious about the goals.
Yeah.
So like last year, my two big goals, right, were like finish this book, at least get it through like a couple drafts.
Yep.
And then train up enough to run a half marathon. And even the running and the writing, I noticed so many parallels between the two. Mm-hmm. They would bump into each other a little bit, because I was at best at like running in the morning. I write in the morning too. So those two goals butted heads.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yet I was at my most happiest when I was able to do both of them, but I could not do that. I couldn't write, run, and then drink that evening, because the next day I would not be able to run or write.
Yeah.
I would just be, and then I'd be grumpy, actually the worst part of myself. So
yeah. Did you find the reward system? Did that work for you? I feel like I tried that, because you mentioned to me a long time ago while during one of our writing chats. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I should try that. Interesting. I should try that. And I don't think it really worked for me.
Yeah.
I think I just got to the end of my day and was like, all right, my day is done. If I haven't written today, all right, we'll get back on it tomorrow.
I think it was wrong for me.
Yeah.
I think the reward system is wrong. I think it was okay to break a habit.
Yeah.
This is going to sound super cheesy, but if writing isn't a reward in and of itself, I think you're going to have a hard time finishing. Like, I think there needs to be some positivity. Like, I think you need to get a little of that dopamine and a little of that positive reaffirmation from writing.
Yeah.
That if you're like, it's not like when I was a kid and I'd finish homework and then I'd like go hang out with friends as a reward.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no, I don't think it's the way to go. I think it was an experiment that I had done, and I do think it helped break a habit.
Yeah.
But it didn't last very long. Like, it was like a month of me kind of withholding.
Yeah. Now, how would you, so you've set, goals for yourself for doing a marathon and finishing a draft of this book, right? That was your goal for last year. Obviously you didn't fail in that, because you completed both those things, right?
I did. Yep.
How do you think you would have, if you didn't complete one of those things, how would you have approached, it's a harsh word, but the failure of maybe not meeting one of those goals? How do you think you would have okay, I didn't do the marathon, or I didn't write the book?
It was a half marathon. I don't want to.
Oh, okay. So no one knows that. We can.
It's a good question.
Still impressive. I couldn't run that much.
And I ended up running 2. And the first one was terrible and the second one was amazing. But
so you basically
anyway,
ran a marathon.
I ran a marathon split up over a month, sure. Yeah. Had I not made that goal, I mean, I would like to say I would treat myself with compassion, but in the same respect, this is going to sound crummy, but like, how could I have not made those goals? Because in a way, I'm like, I set them. I set them, and of course I hit them.
Yeah.
Now I can't say that. I mean, here's the other thing. I finished the things. I didn't run the half marathon quickly.
Yeah.
And I think my book still needs a hell of a lot of work.
But you set out to do the things that you said you were going to do. Your goal wasn't to be like, I'm going to hit the best time in this half marathon. Your goal was just to complete it, which is an awesome goal in of itself. Same thing with the book, right? It's like we didn't both set these goals to write a book to be like, this is going to be a Hugo award winning, right off the bat. It's like, I just want to complete this thing and get it.
I guess it's about setting attainable goals. I knew I could run a half marathon because I'd trained for one before.
Okay.
And I knew that I could write because I've been writing my whole life. So it wasn't beyond reason for me to reach these goals. Even the timing thing with the marathon, like for the second one I ran, I was like, I really want to be faster than like 10 minutes. And once again, that was an attainable goal. Like I blew that out of the water. I was almost sub 9. So I guess that's, if we're pulling back about what I'm trying to get to, is that when you're setting the goals, make sure you can reach them, that they shouldn't be completely beyond your capability. Yeah. So if you've never written before, maybe writing a 500 page book this year isn't it, but maybe finish a short story. Maybe start like building up that capacity or that capability. So yeah, I guess make sure your goals are attainable. I had to make sure mine, I mean, I didn't train for a marathon.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I might not have done that. Now, here, knowing me, I would have signed up and ran myself into the ground and gotten injured. But I knew that was probably too much. Now, next year, I might do a marathon.
Yeah. It's kind of led into where I was heading with the failure aspect of like what's the line of like pushing yourself and setting goals that are attainable, but aren't so soft that like, did you make any actual progress? You know what I mean? Versus like setting something that's attainable, but also pushing yourself just enough where you kind of maybe go a step beyond. I think that's kind of an interesting balance because I pushed myself. I had set so many goals last year and a year before. I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. It's like, I've got the time, I'm taking more time off from quote unquote life here to do these things that I want to do. And I also felt like I felt like if I don't do these things and I don't accomplish them, then I'm not, maybe I'm wasting my time. Like I'm not taking advantage of the time that I have. And that's a weird mental thing that I did to myself.
There's so much that I want to unpack in what you just said, man.
Yeah, I know.
Like one phrase sticks out to me and I think it's completely wrong. Yeah. This taking time off of life thing.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like,
that was my mental state. I've kind of shifted out of that lately because I'm like, that's not it. Like I'm actually, enjoying more of it now than I was before. But yeah, that was like my mental state. And then saying like, oh, if I don't get these things done, like I was like, this was just like a subconscious thing I think I was doing to myself. Like last year, definitely early last year of like, all right, I've spent this time. What do I have to show for this? It's like, what do I have to show? What have I accomplished here? And I think that was like a mental thing.
But that's got to be because there's not it's got to be the monetary thing, right? It's got to be you weren't working and pulling in money, so you don't feel like societal value or something.
I actually didn't think about that, but maybe maybe that's a subconscious thing. But
I think it's just living more than like you ever would have lived had you continued doing the job you didn't like.
Oh yeah. No, you're right. And it took me a while to realize that too. And I think there is just like that, some of the social pressures that come in that doing.
Because I mean, talk about goals. Like when you're in a job that you don't like, I think it can completely consume your ability to like achieve extracurricular goals, personal goals, anything, because that 9 to 5 or whatever it ends up being is so kind of predatory for time and emotion and I don't know, intentionality.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
But it took me a while.
That's not living to me. Like, and that's,
I agree.
I mean, and I think that's the clarity of the pandemic for a lot of people is that spell, that 9 to 5, being a productive quote unquote member of society. I think it was seen for like the sacrificial gesture that it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, you got more money to buy more things and you're fueling the economy and you're good. You're going and buying your coffees and bagels out right now and you're fueling some businesses.
Sure.
But what do you like? But you're sacrificing your actual life.
Yes.
Doing it.
Yep. Yeah. And
anyway, sorry, that's a bit of a ramble.
No, I think that was definitely a problem I had. And I'm out of it now, but now I'm at the point where like, all right, I need to get this thing done because I need to accomplish something with this. So, but yeah, I mean, coming back to the setting the goals, I think I overdid it. And because I was like, well, I've got this time and I've got this time now to focus on just these things. But then realizing that's why I sent this article. So this article I sent him earlier was this thing I read on Inc.com or whatever, just about like Einstein's law of focus and like how he would, identifying the things that you may not accomplish is actually more important than the things you will accomplish, and just scratching those things off the list. And there was a couple of things like Warren Buffett's like wave, how he approaches. He's like, write 25 goals down, circle the top 5. Those are the things you should focus on. The idea is like clearing out that clutter. And it's like, I think what I had done was I wrote down 25 things. And I was like, I'm going to do all 25 of these things, because I've got all this time now. And it's like, no, that's not how this works. Like, that's not how it works at all. And like, you can't multitask. And if you do, sure, you take that back. People can multitask, but the things that they're multitasking against will not be as good as they possibly can. So yeah, I think this year I did the same thing. I wrote down, here are the things I want to do. And I was like, okay, what's the most important thing? I was like, finishing this book and getting it published. Number 1. I circled that. I was like, that is the only thing I need to focus on right now. Of course, I'm running into tasks that are associated with launching this book now. So like, aside from completing the writing aspect and that, I have all the other marketing and promotion things I have to be honest, I have to learn and do myself, because this is all on me. So sometimes that gets a little overwhelming, and I think gets in the way of the initial goal of just completing the book, which I've definitely run into. We've talked about this in like our chats. Like, I'll get a little overwhelmed. I'm like, oh, I got to get the website going. I got to reach out to people who might review this. I got to do social media stuff, and I just gets in the way. And it's like, just finish the book, get it done, and you can do all those things afterwards to your best ability. So
yeah, I like what you said about the 25 goals thing, because I think you're right. You can't do 25 things well. You can do 25 things.
Yep.
I don't think you can finish 25 things.
Can't finish them, and the rest will be shit. Like,
yeah. And honestly, like, one thing about like large goals, like running, like writing, and like what we've talked about, month after month on this podcast, this big goal of writing has so many sub goals inside of it.
Yes.
There's like your daily word count goal. There's your first draft goal. There's your reading goal. There's your editing goal. There's your beta feedback goal. There's all these stages that honestly, I think will provide a feeling of accomplishment before you get to that big, now I'm done goal, right? Like there's little bits of reward along the way. It's not so scary. Like, okay, I've got to write a book and then I'm done. There really is. And maybe that's one of the ways to succeed with large, imposing goals, is to make sure that you have attainable sub goals within them.
Yep. Yeah.
Because same thing with running, right? Like, you can't just go out and run 10 miles if you've never run before. You run or walk a half mile or mile, and you work your way up to it.
Yep.
And along that way, you get reward and accomplishment. So I'll say what's hard for me, even when I have goals. So yeah, like I attained those 2 goals this year, like running and writing, but I have responsibilities that kind of masquerade as goals. Sometimes I have a ton of work goals. I have a lot of relationship goals with my wife. I have familial father goals with my kids, because I want to make sure that I'm present, So, and a lot of times, like you saw me before the holiday break, like it was such a chaotic time. I didn't feel like I was doing anything as well as I could be.
Yep.
I wasn't the writer I wanted to be. I wasn't the employee I wanted to be. I wasn't the husband I wanted to be. I wasn't the father I wanted to be. And I think that's a really wonderful example of a time when I was just spread so thin that I probably should have cut a few things and been okay with that. Like, okay, I can't write right now. So try to read a little bit,
Yep.
My priority will always be father, husband. And it kind of has to be employee too, unfortunately, because I still have to like
Yeah.
bring money into the family. And actually, I quite like my job. But when work is very difficult and work creeps in before work often does, like if I start working at 7, that's my writing time, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So we're launching a website soon, and that's had a slow creep on my time. But it's weird. That's a goal inside of a responsibility. And it completely like can like subsume my productivity and my energy. And honestly, I don't have a good solution for how to manage that. I wish that like, I guess it's probably scheduling and time and setting boundaries for myself, but I'm not there yet.
I was going to say, going back to your comment about the mini goals within getting to publishing a book or getting it finished and complete. I will say my spreadsheets kind of helped me in that. Yes. It's been a while since I've mentioned my spreadsheets, but literally I'll tell you, it was helpful because taking on something, I was like, because I had decided, I was like, I'm going to self-publish this. So, what are all the things I need to do to get there? And writing it all down into like one big list and being like, all right, what are the most important things to do right now? And coming back to like that, list out the 25 things and circle the top 5. That's kind of what I did, where it was like, all right, I have to have the website up. I should have a newsletter, email capture set up. I got to get ISBN numbers, figure that. I got to figure out copyright, book cover. I got to figure that out. Oh, I do want an audiobook. How do I get that done?
Oh my God.
Yeah. All this other stuff like editor, proofreading, still learning how to tell a fucking story. All these things. And I was like, just listed them all out. And then I was like, what's the most important thing right now? It always comes back to finishing the book, focusing on that. That's number one. Help me identify the things that I have to do, and I don't have to have them in the back of my brain all the time because they're on paper. They're somewhere else. They're here. I don't have to think about it right now, but knowing that it's there and it's something I can get to at some point or need to get to at some point was helpful. So
yeah, I mean, I see your point about the spreadsheets. I feel like
yes,
like I do list making, right? And I'll occasionally use spreadsheets, but you're right. I think organizing my time in that way, as much as it's distasteful to me to see my life in a cell. When we're talking about goals, it might be a wonderful way of prioritizing.
Having your life in cells A1 through 3 make you nervous? Cell block 1-1, what is it?
We were talking about like self-publishing and those goals. I have like one thing I am good at when it comes to goal setting and sticking on task is that, for better and worse, I can compartmentalize stuff very well. So like, yeah, I want a query, and I started making a spreadsheet of, agents to reach out to who are kind of in genre, but only in this downtime, quote unquote, while beta feedback's coming in. I actually won't really focus on that until I feel like I can really push it forward right now. And maybe I should be using that better, but it gets overwhelming for me to like add too many goals at once, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point because again, coming back to our writer chats, I know months ago I was having the same problem, and I was like, I got to get this done, and you're like, stop. You're like, stop. Like, do all that stuff once you get this draft done and send it out to beta readers, and you're gonna have 2 weeks to focus on their stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Okay. So yeah, I think it's there's a balance of making sure that you set some goals so you can stay focused on them, but making sure they don't creep into each other too much, because then you're going to end up spreading yourself thin. And just always take a step back. If you start feeling that, just be like, you know what? What's the most important thing right now? What is number one? It's this thing. Get it done, and then work on the next thing. And
I don't think you're off base, right? Because I think there's a fear.
Yeah.
When you're working on a goal and you're in a routine, I mean, we know full well that once one ends, it's really hard to transition to the next. There's this soft space in between goals that can very much balloon, and you break routine, you stop being productive. So I understand the motivation to do everything you possibly can while you're inspired and while you're motivated.
Yeah. Yep.
It's just that being spread too thin might erode your productivity in some other areas. But I totally get it, because that space between, for me, is tough. Like, I'm not writing right now, right?
Yeah. Like,
I wrote a little bit as I'm awaiting beta feedback. I wrote like, I don't know, 10 pages of a short story I'm working on, but the routine's gone.
Yeah.
I've been filling it with writing and work and stuff like that, but it's hard to continue. Like, it's almost like when you walk through a door or you go to a store and you walk in, you're like, what did I say I was going to buy when I got here? You're like, you just can't, it's like a thought that you can't quite
Yeah.
catch.
Yep.
Which I think maybe I should have made a list in a spreadsheet.
I'll send you my template.
Thank you.
Before we move on, what are your goals for this year? 2023.
So 2023.
Writing. We'll stick with writing goals.
Okay. I have a couple goals, I guess. For my current piece, I want it 100% done. And I want to be actively querying.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably researching a little bit of the self-publishing side of things if the querying does not turn up any interest.
I got a spreadsheet for that.
Great. And then I've got like a few concepts I'm kicking around right now, and I don't know if it's shorts, novellas, or novels. So I will say I want to finish at least the first draft of a larger piece. I just don't know which one of these concepts is going to get that spot.
And so your first goal, so sounds like you got like kind of 2 or 3 there, right? So the first one is finish the critical mass to its point to be ready for querying, right?
Yeah.
Second
which
part,
I think I'm close. We'll see how the second round of beta feedback goes. But yeah.
And then the second goal is kind of what's the publishing route? So you're gonna query, and then how do you think you give yourself like a time limit and to be like, all right, I'm gonna start going to self-publishing?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, my knee jerk is like, I'll do that for 6 months on the side. But like, for me, writing is a priority, and I don't want that. Like, I don't want the book that I've finished to be my life. You know, I've got to put together all the materials to query, and I get that, but that's not fun. Like, I want to get back into creating daily, for a couple hours. I want to get into a new set of characters' heads. I just want that. I don't know. I want that experience again. I really, really enjoyed it. So, and I've got some stories that I'm excited to tell. So those are my goals. Also, I want to run a full marathon this year.
All right. Well, I asked you because, let's highlight them because at the end of the year, we'll see how we did. But, so then you want your third outside the marathon one, you want to have a first draft done of whatever next piece of work, whether it be a novella or a full novel.
I'll say like a long form. Somewhere between 250 and 500 pages.
Those are good. Those are attainable. That's doable.
Yeah, I think it's doable.
100% is. So,
but then I want to, continue to have my job, spend time with my family.
Just get rid of all those things, right? Oh, the kids don't listen
for writing goals. Yeah. How about yours? What are your writing goals, Russ?
Well, mine are get this first thing published this spring, which so close. I'm so close. That's goal number 1. Get that published. And the second writing goal is I want to have a second book pretty much ready to go by the end of the year.
Like packaged and done.
Yeah, maybe I'm gonna push myself a little bit to maybe even publish by the end of the year, but I'm giving myself room to like say spring of next year. So that'd be like a year from between the two. That's it. Keeping it simple.
Yeah, I'm sure new ones will pop up.
Then probably
that's good. I think those are attainable. I think using what you've learned, over these past couple of years, it should be a smoother process.
Yes, I could see all the holes. I can see where I need the gaps I need to jump over, the things I need to fill, the things I won't do from this first time. I've already talked to my editor and was like, hey, I'm just planning this thing. I want to set a block of time maybe later in this year. She's like, absolutely, we can talk about it as we get closer. So kind of setting some posts for myself to hit throughout the year. But yeah, that's it. Those are my goals. I've got a bunch of others, but they're all, I think, secondary to these two. So
I have one kind of new goal, something I said I wasn't going to do. And it's something that will be like 6 months down the road once I get some space from my current characters and my current book. And it's just seeing if I can work out the beats for what a sequel would look like, because some of the beta feedback I'd gotten was encouraging in that direction. My first beta feedback, they could see it as a series. I always wanted to have a satisfying conclusion.
Yep.
I like it when movies end obviously, like my book has like a very solid conclusion. but I like it when books and movies end when the world continues to go.
Yeah, there's little threads.
There's threads, but
Yeah.
but that allow the reader to kind of imagine what's next.
Yeah.
And because the sequels tend to suck, honestly. But I mean, I'm curious. I'm curious to see if there's a story to tell and what that would look like. So I might try to work out some beats.
And we have a team goal too of probably maybe getting a little bit further along with the
Western horror. We're never going to do that. We're too busy.
I'm going to do it. I'm doing it. We're there without you. I'm doing it.
Where is that going to fit in your goal?
I already even drew the cover for it too. It's awesome.
Can you draw?
No, but it's concept. I just do concepts and I give it to someone else who knows what they're doing, and then they can make it pretty.
I'd prioritize that if you want to write that. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see. We got our own personal ones to get through, and then we'll see where we are halfway through the year. But so I don't know. I think that was good stuff about writing goals. Hopefully everyone's got goals and go do them right now. Right now.
Go do it
what
now.
What are you reading? What have you been reading?
See, I finished The Elementals, which was really, really good for the first 2 acts. strong second act energy. It was good. It's like a horror story, set in, I don't know, the early 1900s in Georgia. It was very spooky. It was like kind of a ghost story. But man, I'll say, like, unequivocally, I give it a thumbs up. Yeah. But the third act is like, you almost feel like you do when you're writing, like, oh, I just didn't give the third act enough attention. That's how I feel about my third act.
Yep.
I want to go back, and that's why when I start editing this next round, I want to really tease out the third and make sure it's as solid as it can be. Because the third act just kind of feels like it comes to an abrupt close of that book, and I was like, ew. And I started reading Let the Right One In because, one, I've seen the movie in movies, the American adaptation, Let Me In. So I wanted to read the book because I had a concept for like a vampire story that I was working on a little last year and a little more this year. And I realized that it drifts. It's very similar in concept to that book. And I want to make sure that what I'm writing is worth writing before I dedicate a ton of time to it. Because if it's just going to be an accidental, copycat or iteration of this, I don't want to do it. So far, it's pretty wonderful. Now, it's also very adult. And I think I'm writing for maybe a bit of a younger audience. So I do think that I'm not discouraged yet, I'll say.
Yeah.
But yeah, Let the Right One In is pretty good so far. How about you? What are you reading, watching?
Oh boy. So reading, I just started the third book in the Mistborn series, which we had talked about a while ago. Hero of Ages. I'm like just started, maybe like a third of the way through. It's great. I'm enjoying it. Brandon Sanderson's good stuff. There was one book I started and couldn't finish, and it was only 279.
It was so enjoyable.
It was 279 pages, and I couldn't get through it.
Was it in a different language?
Yes, it was Latin. No, it was. So I'm on Amazon. Offers these like monthly free books, right? I think they're mostly just from their publishing arm, and I'll skim through them, and sometimes I'll grab like their crime mystery thrillers, because that's the second book. I want to focus that stuff, so I grabbed this book, and it's part of a series, and it's the first book, and there's like I think 6 or 7 books, and it's kind of just like you got this main character who's FBI or police detective, kind of a procedural type series, and I started it and I couldn't get through it. It's not, I think maybe it just wasn't for me. It wasn't the book for me in a way. Maybe it's marketed isn't correct. It's listed as like a procedural detective crime mystery, but it's really leans heavy into like a romance like novel, which I wasn't expected. What I wasn't expecting. Like someone's compared to like this book is Criminal Minds meets 50 Shades of Grey with better writing. So I should have read that beforehand. I've been like, all right, maybe this isn't for me.
That's the review, but it wasn't marketed as such.
I don't know, not really. I mean, it's set as like a, crime thriller, crime fiction novel, and there's not a lot about.
I'm curious, the cover, is it like a silhouetted man running down an alleyway?
Like every other thriller? No, but it's black and white, trees, titles in red, and it's a house and whatever. It's and all the other books in the series are like that, though. They've got like that's.
So we're talking genre expectations, right? Like this didn't hit what you were expecting.
Yes. I guess I probably should have read more of the synopsis here because it gets into a little bit the strong.
It's like when two lovers meet.
I know. I was like, damn it! I should have read the next paragraph. Two things I had problems with. One, I wasn't expecting like the heaviness of like the sexual attraction between each character, and kind of like the gaze going both ways. Like every chapter,
like the male gaze.
Or it was male. Gaze? It was both.
Well, because was it written by a male or a female?
Female author.
Okay.
Yeah, and like the gaze between female and male characters, like every other chapter, was like I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't expecting. I was like, oh, this is more of like a heavy. I don't know. Like,
it's interesting, right? Because like there's very much this, as we wrote like one of our early podcasts, men writing women.
Yeah.
And it's like a subreddit, it's an online trope, but there very much is like a women writing women or women writing men too. And
yeah,
I think sometimes it's often celebratory, but also I think other times it's very kind of like objectifiable in a way. So
yeah, and I think this fits a genre. I mean, it's a category, I guess. I mean, if it's got 4,000 ratings, it's got 2,000 ratings on Goodreads. It's at 4.3 on Goodreads. And I read through some of the lower reviews, and they had the same reaction I did, and was like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting this. Is this supposed to be a crime like detective series, or is this just a steamy?" Because every chapter was just like discussing that character or objectifying that the other character, like whether it be male or female. It sounds like a
romance, right? So.
Yeah, pretty much. But it was really tough. And then there was other things like I caught that was like I was having problems with. Like there was like a lot of head hopping like within a scene and within like with no clear break, which was throwing me off. So like stuff like that really made it tough for me to get through. The dialogue was kind of tough for me too. Like it just was like is this how detectives talk to each other? I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's people talk to each other like this. I don't know.
So the head hopping was, did you like lose the thread of like who was who, or like was it just confusing that the POV had switched so often?
It was confusing the POV had switched so often. So all of a sudden I was like, oh wait, so now we're in her head. Okay, so then the next who's being objectified right now? Because it's like it was that much. It was really that much. It was like every chapter I'm like, all right, I can't take this anymore. This isn't for me. But there's a series, she's got 5 books in the series. It seems like it's doing well. So kudos for writing and getting published. And
yeah, she's obviously got an audience, and it just wasn't your cup of tea.
I am just not that audience. And there's things I learned from like things that I don't want to do in my books, and making sure that I'm or the stories I'm trying to tell. But so I read that, and half of it, and immediately jumped into the Mistborn, the 3rd book in that series, which I'm enjoying very much. So
I mean, I feel like that's a little proof in the pudding, right? Like based on our POV episode, our whole point was saying if you switch POV too often, it can become really confusing for the reader
and jarring. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it comes back to some of those things where, after going through the process of sending a book to an editor, and we even talked about some other books I've read where like there's a one phrase to describe someone tilting their head, like cocked head. Oh, there's a lot of raised eyebrows and smirks in this book. Like every other paragraph raised eyebrow and they smirked. And I was like, it makes you think like, okay, did the editor catch these things? And the author was just like, no, I want that in there. Or the editor just missed these things. And in the previous book, I really enjoyed that series. The one where there was like, and he cocked his head and he cocked. I'm like, stop cocking your head. Jesus Christ, no one cocks their head this much. It's like, I find it interesting that like, there's a line of like, well then is it the editor missed it or is the author just sticking with their.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
I don't know. Things to think about and pay attention to, but maybe who knows? Maybe someone out there will read it and enjoy it. People have, so. Good for them. All right, well, that's our episode. Thanks everyone for listening. If you enjoyed it, think someone else might, send it along to them. You can find us on Twitter at writer_syndrome. Send us feedback, ideas, or topics, whatever. You can go to writersyndrome.com for all of our episodes and other contact info. Yeah, and I think the next episode we're going to talk about kind of the idea process.
Yeah, it sounds good. Is there one? I don't know.
I don't know. But maybe we'll talk about our own idea process and how we ideaed. How do we idea? How do we idea? So yeah, that's going to be our next episode. So join us then. Ideas. Until then, just keep writing.